Great, so now we'll do a panel discussion continuing on AI for SDGs. I'm Yolanda Lannquist. I'm head of research and advisory at the AI Initiative at the Future Society with Cyrus. And we focus on furthering the governance of AI to enable beneficial applications like AI for SDGs while mitigating its risks. We're an AI governance and policy think tank originally incubated at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. I wanted to briefly mention two projects that we're working on related to this topic at the Future Society before handing it over to my panelists for presentations. The first is we're partnering with the World Bank's Digital Development Program to build policy and regulatory frameworks and roadmaps for AI capabilities and development in developing countries in an ethical and safe way. And second, with Cyrus, we're building a global data commons and an AI commons, along with other multi-stakeholder leaders like Element AI and UN Global Pulse and others, to help enable access to AI solutions for beneficial applications like AI for SDGs. So now I'll briefly introduce the panelists before your presentations. So, Hovig, Etyemezian, heads UNHCR's Innovation Department, and prior was head of its Mosul, Iraq office, and oversaw humanitarian response operations for UNHCR in Africa and the Middle East. He also coordinated a UN NDP-funded rule of law program in the MENA region, among other human rights and peace-building projects. Ben Kumpf is head of innovation at the UK Department for International Development. Prior, he led innovation at UNDP, and over the past 13 years, worked on programs and policy design at the intersection of innovation, technology, and development in numerous countries. Julien Cornebise is Director of Research and AI for Good at Element AI, and Honorary Associate Professor at University College London. Prior to Element AI, Julien was an early researcher at DeepMind, and also worked with Amnesty International and continues to do so among other nonprofits. And he has graduate degrees in computer engineering, mathematical statistics, and math and computational statistics. So the resident AI researcher. And Jonnie Penn is an affiliate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard, and a doctoral scholar of AI at University of Cambridge. He was a Google Technology Policy Fellow and a Fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts, and has led the AI for Social Good workshops at numerous machine learning, the top machine learning conferences. So we have a really exciting panel. We'll start with Ben for the presentation. Do you have your clicker?
Thank you, Yolanda. Good afternoon. I work for the UK Department for International Development, and we work with partners towards ending global poverty, achieving gender equality, better managing humanitarian crisis, among other challenges. I'll present two specific use cases of AI in action, addressing challenges related to the Sustainable Development Goals. But there are experiments going on addressing all of the 17 goals. And these goals are, in fact, the goals of all member states, the goals of Estonia, of Germany, the UK, of Kenya, South Africa, and of the people of this world to hold their governments to greater account in achieving those important goals. Two examples before diving into the case studies in AI in action towards the Sustainable Development Goals. In Yemen, DFID is working with the Met Office, with NASA, and US scientists on better predicting outbreaks of cholera, using geospatial data, historical weather data, to predict now up to 8 weeks outbreaks of cholera and enabling UNICEF to deliver urgent preventative needs on the ground in the war-torn country, massively reducing the number of deaths from 2018 to 2019 and significantly improving health outcomes. In Mozambique, only 25% of the population have access to the national grid. Startups and the private sector are stepping in. And one of the startups is SolarWorks. They have a really innovative business model as pay-as-you-go, but they experience that many of their users are quite dissatisfied because eventually their solar home system runs out of battery. And to address this, what SolarWorks does is using machine learning to, on the one hand, read the user behavior of the solar home system, and on the other hand, using weather data to have really customized prediction that is translated into tailored advice for the households in how to use the solar energy they have at their disposal for longevity. The two examples I'm going to mention a bit longer I picked out because they both pose really interesting questions, not only for international development, but for all countries. The first one is around aligning national plans to the SDGs. The SDGs have 169 targets. And I used to work for the UN Development Program. One of the services we provided to national governments was aligning national plans to the SDGs, which used to take several weeks of the work of analysts to go through all the national plans, seeing to what degree are they aligned. UNDP partnered with IBM Watson, used natural language processing and machine learning, and massively reduced the time needed to see the alignment and to provide targeted advice. The interesting question this poses is, what is it that we want to automate? Evidently, making the work more efficient of UN officials and freeing that time up for more productive tasks is a non-brainer. But what is it that societies at large, particularly in countries with high youth unemployment, growing youth bulges, massive economic inequalities, want to automate? Where do we put our values in saying there might be a cost reduction if we automate, but we want to put greater emphasis on human interaction? Let's think of care for the elderly. And those are policy choices. And those is where policymakers have to step in dialogue with societies and think about to what degree are we proactive, formulate values, and are not about fixing market failures, but shaping markets based on strong values related to AI and automation. Before I mention my second example, a short illustrative video of what things look like in many countries.
Entering the future.
Nice. Okay, Noel, we try now. Come to your hand. Two black.
Two black.
Yeah.
So what I'll
Come
do...
again. Come again, Sashi.
Whoa.
You two back over way.
What I have to do to get...
What you have to do to
That's how ritualist thing is.
Yeah.
I have to use that piece of white. Let's say a napkin, and show again. So what's the difference?
Bring up again.
Napkin again.
Right, put your hand out.
What's it called in my hand?
Man, the black man getting fight
Black
all
man
over,
getting fight
boy.
all over.
All over.
This video was taken in the Facebook office in South Africa, and evidently this is not an AI system, just an intelligent sensor. And I used this short video just to illustrate 2 points, actually. First one is, we have to design with the user. We cannot design solutions elsewhere and export them to low and middle income countries. But secondly, here's an opportunity to design based on values. In our countries, we're talking about the automation of transportation. Let's have inclusive design not be an afterthought, but design from the get-go the entire system for and with people with disabilities. There's a huge opportunity in our countries as well as in low-income countries to redesign systems based on values. The second example. Last year, 149 million children globally were stunted, suffering from hunger or malnutrition. In India, you have a system where in most cities and in urban slums, social workers are in charge of measuring children and then providing services. However, only a third of those measurements are accurate, about a third of children are never measured, and a third is inaccurate. The German non-governmental organization Welthungerhilfe stepped in, teamed up with Microsoft, and developed a cloud-based application to overcome some of the most important bottlenecks in weight measurement, height measurement, and to digitize the data entry. This app leverages augmented reality and machine learning by, well, starting with informed consent of the parents, taking a picture of the child, sending it up to the cloud when the phone is online again, where it models it, and based on more and more information, and initially based on human expert input, provides analytics and helps to massively speed up processes, improve the accuracy of predictions, and enables social workers in urban slums in Mumbai, where 10,000 children were initially measured, to provide better services on malnutrition. What this use case opens up as an important question is, how does this interface with the data system of national governments and the National Health Service? How do we ensure data interoperability? How do we not design AI boutique initiatives in the global north and bring them to the global south? This morning on the panel on social and political implications, Nanjira from the World Wide Web Foundation made an important point, and I want to reinforce it. We cannot use the countries that are low and middle income as test beds for AI. And at DFID, we are building on the digital principles, which we endorsed with many other organizations, and which need updating. And we talked a lot about principles today. The reason why I'm putting this up is because, A, I want to advocate for open source. The solution from Welthungerhilfe is based on open source, and innovators from across the globe and coders can contribute, but also because we have to understand the ecosystem. And I want to deliberately bring it down a level from principles to practical applications, because we are seeing very much a need from development practitioners, from frontline workers on concrete guidance to enabling emerging data and AI. Together with main partners in the development field, as part of the International Innovation Alliance, we published a discussion paper to frame the challenges. I recommended also for an overview of ongoing experiments on SDGs. And several years ago, we published with UNDP and UN Global Pulse a practical data guide handbook for data initiatives, which needs to be updated for AI, but provides a hands-on first step for non-experts to start experimenting. This question set for government officials, curated by the UK Innovation Fund Nesta, proposes really important questions as almost a decision tree, and is something we with IDIA, the International Development Innovation Alliance, will build on to provide guidance to practitioners. And an important point is not made on this, what I perceive pretty useful overview, which is the importance of understanding systems. Too often our focus is on the AI system and potentially on the product. But we have to bring the technologists and innovators together with the people who have a deep understanding of the health system or the education system, even if that means slowing down progress. And here's a cautionary tale before I conclude, from about 9 years ago in Uganda. DFID was not involved, and I will not name the organizations. But the development problem was the prevalence of HIV/AIDS and gender inequalities, specifically insufficient sexual and reproductive rights among young women. So an international NGO teamed up with a big technology company, and what they designed was a system where young girls and boys, well, not young, sorry, teenage girls and boys, could send their questions via free SMS to a service, asking all questions about sexual relations, sexual health. And the answers were pre-formulated by young Ugandans, and then picked up by a simple algorithm in terms of keywords, and then sent to the specific question. A really feel-good innovation, and the organizations involved saw it as a success and celebrated accordingly. An independent randomized control trial undertaken by a university showed that, in fact, in those communities where this was taken up, the number of new infections of HIV/AIDS increased. And I'm pointing this out for the reason that if the technologists and innovators would have involved local activists, local gender activists, they would have most likely had quicker feedback loops to understand that something is not working, and they would have situated their solution, their product, in other initiatives that always need to be gender transformative if we are addressing such complex issues. So this has two implications. For the practical practitioner level, for the decision makers in the room, I urge you to oblige your innovators and technologists to sit with the subject matter experts and with the local innovators and go slower, but deeper and better. And of course we have to take risks, but we gotta institutionalize quick feedback loops to see what we are on. And secondly, for international development, I would argue that the emphasis should be decreased on the boutique AI projects and more on conversations on the policy and system level to have with partners the conversation around what are the right processes to get together with communities, the rest of society and the private sector to develop the right principles and processes to get our industry moving. And I want to conclude with DFID is investing increasingly not in boutique initiatives but in local ecosystems. We are starting a new program in Nigeria, Kenya, in South Africa to help further kickstart their local ecosystems with a regulatory element in it, with conversations between regulators in the UK and those countries, and particularly to provide the innovators, the local drivers of change with a line of sight from early stage to sustainable scale for AI solutions and for the development goals. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the government of Estonia for having us here. I was really hoping I'd be able to enter from backstage like this morning, that dancer that we had, but I'm kidding. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm going to talk about some research that actually this is the first time I've been I'll share it. So I welcome that opportunity and welcome your patience as I share some of the experimental stuff we're doing. I'm going to be talking about AI youth and SDG 8, which is the goal of having decent work and economic growth. And in particular, two targets, 8.6 and 8.8, which are about engaging young people in the workforce and ensuring that labor protections remain protections as the digital economy transforms the way that we work every day. And if you're a young person, or if you know a young person, you might know that being a young person in the workforce today is not fantastic. Young people are 3 times as likely to be unemployed as an adult. Globally, a poll of young people, young women aged 18 to 24 found that 64% of young women thought that getting a decent, well-paid, permanent job would be the hardest thing that our generation faced. And 54% of young people globally think that they will be less well off than their parents, which is an indictment on our values, I think, the fact that young people think that they are in decline. That deserves urgent remedy from all of us. And the project I'm going to talk about today is something I'm working on with a group of collaborators, one of which is Dr. Christina Kolkloff, who's at Uni Global Union, which represent about 20 million workers worldwide. They're a federation of over 600 trade unions, and they're looking at how to kind of improve what being in a union is like, to improve the value that they give to their members. And in the Young Workers Lab, which we're working on collectively, in addition to with input from colleagues of mine at Harvard, at the Berkman Klein Center, we're trying to understand how digital technologies can be used by unions and young workers to improve young workers' job quality and voice in the digital world of work. So another way to think about this is how could we one day use artificial intelligence, or today use artificial intelligence, to make our work life better. And this is the standard pipeline you see to answer a question like that, right? You have to think from soup to nuts. How would we use data, use artificial intelligence, machine learning systems to improve, I don't know, recruitment or retainment or membership access to important information, things like that. And because we're working with trade unions all over the world, there's different levels of what we call digital maturity. You in government are probably very familiar with this phrase, which helps you just kind of profile the different strengths and weaknesses of an individual partner, and then make recommendations in line with that level of maturity. And so if we were to address them in aggregate, these different trade unions working on different aspects of this problem, some of the interventions we've done thus far is a landscape analysis, just looking at existing digital tools that trade unions are using, and especially to recruit young people and retain young people. We've also looked at a data maturity framework, which lets you kind of test, if you're at one of these organizations, to test where you are relative to your peers. And we're also trialing new tools like Thought Exchange, which is a program that lets you host virtual town halls so you can weigh in on an issue that's relevant to your union without having to necessarily be in person. You can do it, on your way home from work, on your phone, anonymously, and vote up and down key issues, which is really important because it lets you, because it's anonymous, also have your voice heard, whether you're a young member or an older member, and whether you're able to attend or not. In the first tests we've done with Thought Exchange, we've got participation from 2 to 3%, in some activities up to 15%, so results are good thus far. But to go back to this pipeline, the thing we found when we did this landscape analysis was you know, 9/10 of machine learning is just cleaning the data, structuring the data, and getting the system kind of ready for a data scientist to come in and look at it and say, OK, here's what I can do to help you. An important part of this, though, in terms of power dynamics, is who's deciding what is measured. And so, you know, as I've just heard, some of the work we're already doing is addressing the kind of structural needs of being ready to bring in data scientists or to bring on more data scientists in some cases in certain unions. But the intervention that we thought was missing, and the one that the thing that we've been building over the last few months, is before that, on the kind of far most right of the pipeline there, which is how the data actually enters the system. And we've developed this tool called Spotlight. And the premise is, what would collective action look like if rendered through personal data? So everybody in this room has a smartphone, I assume. And I imagine that because there's kind of only so many smartphones out on the market, most of you probably have 14 base sensors in your smartphone. So things like an accelerometer, GPS, a thermometer. And with those sensors, the question we have posed is, what could we do to protect people at work just by giving them a way to kind of gain evidence about their work site? So this is how it works. Let's say some of the feedback we've heard from our partners is, in Denmark, many young people are concerned that offices are hotter and hotter each year. If you're a young person, that's going to be the reality for our lives because of the climate crisis. And globally, there aren't strong protections yet on what the law says is a maximum limit on heat. And so if you had this app in your pocket, you and your colleagues could take a measurement of the temperature and take a record of the temperature, and then either offer that to your union, or even if you're not in a union, you could kind of work and use collective action to try and remedy the situation. And you can imagine there's multiple different permutations of what you can do with the different combinations of sensors and the different combination of data streams that you could make available. So we've just launched, actually, today, this framework with the Guardian Project, who are the developers of this system we've been working with, who are also colleagues at Harvard, at the Berkman Klein Center, and have worked on, for example, Edward Snowden's app. They are award-winning, very, very well-respected team for security. They basically have the highest standards we could find. They build apps for vulnerable communities. And with them, we've built this framework that we've made open source so that people can develop their own solutions in addition to the sorts of things that we're trying to fix. So it's like a Swiss Army knife that any of you could add to if you had certain things uses that you might want to make of this system. But some of the examples of things we're looking at is, you know, for home care workers in New Zealand who, you know, are paid for a certain amount of miles in a day, but think that they're actually driving a lot more going from different homes to take care of senior people, you know, elderly people. This will give them a record, a GPS record of the mileage that they're doing each day. Young workers in London who are spending, you know, 2 hours commuting each day and might be spending an hour and a half sending emails can show evidence saying, look, I've been working an hour and a half more every day unpaid. And we have, you know, it's evidence-based, working on letting people kind of prove the work that they're doing. And also, this is an early prototype of the GPS locations, the thing I was just describing there. The kind of motivation behind this project is this data already exists. Google and Apple and these major tech companies know where you are. They know whether you're sleeping or not by whether you're using your phone or not. And this infrastructure already exists. So as a thought experiment, I put to you, what would work look like if governments and worker advocates and trade unions could interpret those data stores based on their values? Because I've heard again and again, you know, aspirations for things that we collectively want to change in the world. But if we change from this, if we develop new tools from the same values, nothing will change. I'm fed up with hearing people talk about revolution in the same sentence as digital technology. Revolution is what happens when you have a change to the social order. And in too many cases, I find that digital technology is just reinscribing the same values and keeping people, if not making things worse in terms of access to work and things like that. And so the main motivation here is to try and let other people interpret the data of their workday. As I said, actually I haven't mentioned this part, one important thing to state is that there's huge safety vulnerabilities here, potentially, right? The beauty of this system is the data does not leave your phone unless you choose it to. It starts on your sensors, and it gives you basically access to the data that you're creating. There's no third parties. We don't have it. There's no cloud storage. We operate no servers. It's just giving you access to your own data. And as I said, this is free and open source. I have a link to the page there of the code, and if you would like to collaborate with us, please be in touch. The last thing I'll say is a friend posed a thought experiment to me in the UK recently. He said, you know, people in AI talk about and can imagine and brag about almost this future where we don't have to work. And he said, if that's going to be the case, I think we should start having a new bank holiday every year, which gives us 250 years to figure out what to do with our time if work is not the reason we are born and the reason we live. And I think in that spirit, I hope that this will be a contribution, this experiment. We're launching it now privately with different trade unions. And although I'm not a part of Uni Global in that part of this project, I'm a researcher that's developing this project sort of in tandem with them. I really do think there's a lot of opportunity to help workers, but we have to give workers their own voice and not be patronizing in that process. So thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for staying so late, for those of you who've been here for the full 2 days. As a machine learning researcher, I could go all in with tons of equations. I'm going to spare you this. And instead, it will be a talk mostly about pretty satellite pictures. But before jumping in there, what you're not going to hear me say is, stand back, I'm going to save the world with AI. That's not how it works. The reason why, for me, as a scientist, it is so important to talk to you is that technology, as Kentaro Toyama used to say, it's not a solution. It is just a way to fit much better to the incentives that we have as humans. You can have the best algorithm. It's just going to allow you to go into the worst part of the incentives that you have around you. Knowing that, looking at the algorithms I was developing, I thought, well, how can I have the most impact there? And it's by putting it into the hands of those whose incentives are already around solving some of the SDGs and removing some of the problems, or at least progressing on some of the problems we face as a species. So let me tell you a story about that went. I decided to leave DeepMind, where I was one of the early researchers, precisely to be able to focus more on this kind of applied project. And I started volunteering with Amnesty International in a project called Decode Darfur, led by Milena, and with a PhD student who was doing that on his night and weekend called Daniel. And this is 2017. In machine learning and artificial intelligence time, this is ages ago. Now, this is Darfur. You have all heard of what is going on. The problem in Darfur, you see here on the top left of your screen, you see a tukul. That's a typical hut made of wood, mud, straw. You see them in villages like this in the middle of the desert, surrounded by fences. And the problem is, in the bottom left, this is two Janjaweed coming on horseback or in a truck, burning part of the village, raping the women, scattering the population to the wind. And it's been going on for 15 years. And Amnesty International, along as many other organizations, have been trying to keep track of what is going on in order to raise alarm, raise public awareness, and eventually get to legal resolution. And as you can see in the bottom right, there is a clear aerial view of what is left after a tukul has been destroyed. Now, Amnesty used to have one domain expert. Her name is Micah. She was able to analyze a few hundred square kilometers and make fantastic qualitative reports, saying, hey, here's before, here's after, here's what we can observe in this small region around Jebel Mara. Very impactful report, lots of work, lots of qualitative work, combined with reports from on the ground, witnesses, survivors who fled and were able to speak in a smuggled satellite phone. Now, Amnesty, and Milena in particular, back in late 2016, started to say, well, can we have one expert, Micah, train a crowd? And so they made a website funded with the Swedish lottery, actually, and a big promotion in the Swedish tube, whereby anyone could connect on the website, see a bit of Darfur, and after a quick tutorial, click to show where there were villages on these images, where they were able to detect human presence. Because there's no map of Darfur, so if you want to monitor the destruction of villages, you need to know where these villages are in the first place. And that went actually very well. In 2 weeks, 7,000 volunteers put as much time as 3.5 years of a full-time person. That's when I bumped into them, and it doesn't take much on an AI guy to say, well, the same way one expert trained a crowd, you can have a crowd train an algorithm. And the same way you scale from a few hundred square kilometers to a few thousand square kilometers, actually you could do that continent size. So here's what we built. And there's both nice AI and, importantly, proper visualization techniques in order to make that actually into the hands of the human rights experts who are going to use it. Because too often, when I do algorithms, I get super excited about, well, great performance. We have our F1 score, which is through the roof. Yeah, great. The actual use is much further down the line. So this is what we're seeing here. In green, on this map of Darfur, you are seeing the big town of Nyala. In green is where every human, or all the humans we have seen, have clicked and said, well, there is a trace of human presence here. There is a building. Big town of Nyala, it could be Tallinn, it could be London, lots of metallic roofs, square grid, a square in a park in the center. Volunteers also identified the hut here in this field on the top right, small isolated hut. But they also found false positives, like this bunch of rocks and trees here, mistakenly labeled as human presence. And they also gave examples of villages in a more rural area, like this one, much fewer metallic roofs, but still pretty dense and a lot of vegetation near one of the main roads of Sudan. So we trained a neural network on that. I'm going to spare you the detail. It's a ResNet 50 with heavy data augmentation. And we applied it to the whole region. And in red is all the habitation that we have been able to find in Sudan, applying to the whole region. So if we zoom in, we find the urbanization pattern in the middle of the desert, where there is a safe zone around the village. You do not need to build, you can go back for the night. We find these villages much more arid in the middle of the desert. But we also find these little specks. What are these specks? If we zoom in, are these false positives? No, they're actually just huts, tukuls, along cattle trails, which domain experts tell us, well, these are actually huts from shepherds living closer to their cattle. The next question is, how well does that generalize beyond the country on which we train? So we applied it 2,000 kilometers south to Uganda, and here my heart sank. The algorithm must have failed. There is no megalopolis in this part of Uganda. Well, except it's just actually all positives, very different urbanization patterns, with small amount of small clusters, 3-4 huts, all along the network of roads that crisscross this fertile region. So we have a good generalization beyond the country, and that starts to open many impact for SDGs in terms of where to attribute the resources, in terms of how to monitor for human rights violations when they start to happen, in terms of monitoring for climate impact. Now, that's all very nice. 2017, there's one problem. One snapshot of Darfur cost $4 million, and that is with the NGO special discount. Obviously not the kind of money that your typical NGO has, nor the kind of money that you can spend, even if you are a big UN agency, that you can spend without thinking every time to monitor continuously. All right, so that was 2017. And of course, at the time, we thought, well, there's all these great public satellites which are free, which come from ESA, from NASA, from there. They're fantastic, but they are low resolution. We would not be simply able to find and to see the villages there. Nor would we be able to count cattle, nor would we be able to monitor the kind of thing that we really care about. So I spent 2018 and 2019 to build a full team around AI for good at Element AI. But the whole point here is to partner with the domain experts, empower them, bring the tech to them, and work with them in deep partnership to see, oh, well, here maybe we have an algorithm that can help you in that, and scale up the work you're already doing. And so after having built this team, we're now 12. We started working with the European Space Agency and the Mila Lab on satellite super resolution. Essentially, you've all seen CSI New York or Blade Runner, of these kind of movies where you just see a picture and then you enhance and you zoom into infinity and are able to capture the killer in the reflection in the glasses of the person that's lying on the ground, something like that, right? This is science fiction, I'm sorry. This is TV and movies. The information is not in the image. However, you can actually merge several low-resolution images The satellite comes back regularly. It's a low-resolution, cheap satellite. There's tons of them. Get daily revisit of an area. Slightly different angles. Sub-pixel information differs. But by aggregating these different low-resolution images, you can rebuild a high-resolution image. That's not a new idea. First done at Microsoft Research in 1984. It's in your phone, but it's not being applied for the kind of SDG development that we are looking towards. Now, what does that look? What did that look eventually when we did that 2 months ago? Now, I'm going to show you a vegetation satellite called PROBA-V. 300 meters per pixel, a revisit every month. Sorry, 100 meters per pixel that they revisit every month. That's the expensive version. This is the kind of image you're seeing here. These are crop circles. Now, you can also have this low-resolution image, daily revisit, zoom factor 3 less. So here it's getting harder to count exactly what is going on and to see, for example, the degree of maturity of the crops. But you get several of them every day. As we combine them through our AI-powered algorithm, I hate the word AI, by the way, it's full of hype, so let's say machine learning algorithm, we're able to reconstruct this. You can compare in the middle the super result version built from low-resolution images to the actual high resolution that we are trying to guess at. If we zoom in, good luck counting on the left picture any kind of details on the surface area of the crops. Much easier to do on the reconstructed image in the middle. It's actually even more striking on the following images. Here, let's try and count again on the low resolution the number of fields that we have. Or let's try to see the state of the river that's in the middle. It's very hard. If you look at this reconstructed image that we have in the middle here, now you start to actually be able to count the fields, count which state they are in, see major transport hubs. And again, to compare to the rare and expensive high-resolution sensors on the right. And when it comes to water management, limnology, essentially, inland water management, same thing here. You've got on the left the low resolution, where you can see that there is a river, but good luck trying to see what is its current state. When you rebuild from several low-resolution images, you can follow it. You can see how full or empty it is, how it's tortuous, what is going on there, which is quite a good approximation for the actual expensive and rare high resolution that you can see on the right-hand side. Now, all of this is very cool as an algorithmician. I'm really happy, cool, we've done it. No, we haven't. It's only the beginning. As I said, the key is in the partnerships. In the last 2 years, we've built partnerships with many different organizations, from the Future Development Lab at ESA and NASA, to Human Rights Watch, to Forensic Architecture. Here I'm focusing on our satellite work, but really deep down, the idea is to get all the developments of AI and bring them in their many facets. So we've been also working on natural language processing that was mentioned by UNHCR in the previous session. We've been working on abuse on Twitter. We've been working on detecting tear gas canisters used against civilians in protest. With all these partners, we're eventually getting to the point where we see intersection between their different needs, so that it doesn't stay just one project here, one project there. Very nice project, sure, but it actually goes to scaling up in the form of common products that can be used by all of them. And this is how we can have tech going to an impact, by putting these kind of reusable tools in the hands of the people whose expertise in solving SDGs is being built on their entire careers. Now, how can you help? Funny, you should almost ask. You have here my Twitter account and my email. If you know of whether it be calls for proposals for funding, whether it be, oh, I've got this pile of data here that I have no idea what to do, contact me. If you have use cases, hey, the stuff you just showed here could be really interesting for this or that, please do contact me. If you think of joint ventures, if you think of partnerships, please do contact me, because there is a huge amount that needs to be done. We have 17 sustainable development goals, which can seem extremely far away. If we want to move together toward that, indeed, it's not just AI, it's really the partnerships. Thank you.
I think I'm the last speaker of this event now. Thank you. Thank you for your patience and for waiting for this long. I can't see my presentation yet, but all right. Maybe I'll start very briefly to say that to me this is very personal, what I'm about to talk to you. about. My grandparents were refugees in Aleppo, in Syria, 100 years ago. My father fled Syria in the 70s. We grew up in the civil war in Lebanon. We fled to Syria in 1990 because our shelter was bombed in Lebanon. And now my cousins in Syria are refugees in Sweden and in other countries because of the war in Syria. So for me, this is personal, and it wasn't the plan, but it happened that I ended up working for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And I've been serving mostly on the African continent and Middle East. And again, it wasn't planned, but I ended up being the head of innovation for UNHCR since June this year. And so for me, it's personal, and for us, it's about the individual. It's about the person. And when you think about the subject of this great summit, and when you think about technology and AI, you need to think also, when you think about us, the humanitarians, think about now over 70 million forcibly displaced people in the world, out of which we have around 40-something million internally displaced within their countries, and around 26 million refugees who fled their homes and who cannot return. And decisions that we make impact them. And the big difference is that they are not, unfortunately, we advocate for this, they are not enjoying the rights that citizens in democratic countries enjoy. So their level of access to rights is lower. They are more vulnerable. And so when you think about protection of your citizens, think about the protection of the most vulnerable ones who don't have the basic access to services. So decision-making for us is key. When you make decisions, think about those very vulnerable individuals. Now, for us, we are judged as humanitarian organizations based on two paradigms. One, whether we, the UN refugee mandated agency, are we fulfilling our mandate in the protection of refugees, but also we're judged on our actions, the consequences of our program. Do we deliver humanitarian assistance in emergencies settings in the right manner? Because guess what? Our decisions have consequences on the life or death of refugees and displaced people. So if you make a decision on how you come up with a food distribution system, and if you do it wrongly, and I witnessed this in the Western Sahara area, people die of malnutrition. So if your systems are not right, there are dire consequences on hundreds of thousands and millions of people. And I want to maybe focus a little bit on the theme of the discussion and talk about automated decision making, bring it a little bit out, zoom out, and give you the example of the use of AI in releasing inmates from prisons. I don't want to mention the name of the country or the company, but it's there. And so imagine if the color of your skin, and Ben's example was a good example, the color of your skin determining whether you are released or not from prison. Now, in a normal country, let's say in a democracy, you might have access to feedback. So if you feel that you were unjustly treated and you were not paroled, then you might have recourses. For the most vulnerable in the world, they might not have recourses to this. And so to this luxury of feedback. And so when you make decisions and you don't take them into consideration, you put them in harm's way. One other paradigm that I want you to reflect on today is efficiency versus the needs of the people. So we're rightfully so under pressure from our donors, from the private sector, even ourselves. We put ourselves under the pressure of delivering better and with efficiency. And usually, technology is associated with that. So more technologically advanced, more efficient, and therefore we can do our job right. Well, there's something missing in that equation, and what is missing is the people. So whereas we want to be more efficient, but we don't want to be more efficient at the expense of the most vulnerable. Their opinion, their feedback is important. Their feedback on our advancements in technology is key for us to develop the right models that don't go against our do no harm principle. So that's something that I want us to leave the room remembering. If there's one principle I want you to remember is the do no harm principle. Our actions vis-a-vis the displaced need to bear in mind the do no harm principle for these vulnerable groups. So with that, I want to throw at you 7 ethical considerations that we, the Innovation Service in UNHCR, kind of thought of. We didn't create those, but we think of them when we think of the usage of technology and artificial intelligence in the business that we do. In Armenian we say, lezus mazisfera lezuisfra maspusav. Hair grew on my tongue from repeating the same thing, which is the inclusion of those who are most at risk. Imagine, and this happens again, a country decides on which refugees they invite, so they resettle to their own country, and where to place them in that country based on the economic factors, whether the head of the household is an engineer or not. Imagine if that is the only variable, whereas we in UNHCR, we advocate for the resettlement of the most vulnerable groups in the world. So imagine if you take the engineer because the engineer fits better in certain parts of your country and responds to the demand on the economic side, but you don't tackle the vulnerability of the person. So you need to include them when you come up with those algorithms, because if you don't, you might end up not resettling the most vulnerable. Imagine you're determining, the machine, an algorithm is determining whether this person is a refugee or not. And imagine if your algorithm is determining whether this person should be deported or not. Now, as I said, the prison example, you might have recourse. Imagine if the machine decided that this person is going to be deported, and they are deported to that country which is violating their rights. Imagine the consequences. It's very simple. At the minimum, loss of life. So think of the principle of fairness. The machine might help you sort some of the data when it comes to how your employees are interviewing refugees and how fair they are. The machine might be able to detect certain flaws in the processing. But if you replace the humans by the machine, think of the consequences. So it is very important for us to be fair and to treat people with integrity. We are pressed in emergencies to make decisions very fast. So we don't have time. I remember when I was in Mosul recently, before joining UNHCR in Geneva, I was basically sent to the border between ISIS-controlled and Iraqi government-controlled areas. And in a matter of few days, I had to make a decision and advise my colleagues on where we build camps. We had to make decisions very fast. So how do you make decisions in that moment that are respecting the diversity and they're open to the feedback? Those are considerations that are very important. Now, transpose these into our discussion here. My colleague Sophia mentioned our JETSON project in Somalia. We actually, speaking to the refugees, we understood that the goat movements and the sales of goats in the market might be one variable to take into consideration when we want to predict displacement of population. If we were not open to talk to them, we would probably not have thought about that as part of the algorithm. So there's also an opportunity there. You're diverse. Your team is diverse enough to think about these things. So when I mention diversity, is also the teams that are operating. Do you have a team that is diverse, or do you have a unicolor team? That's also, it helps you maybe think about the different variables that you use. transparency and dignity. You see in this photo the usage of iris technology. This is probably shot in Jordan, this photo. We realize that it's extremely important to be transparent with our clients, the most vulnerable ones. Explain to them how that data is going to be used. They actually have to sign a consent form, and it's not in small font and very long so that they can't read and they just click accept, like one of our interveners said earlier. It's very short. It needs to be understood by our client, the refugee, and we need to be transparent with them on what we're going to do with their data. And the way the photo is taken, it's key because you can see that the refugee is sitting, is seeing the iris machine, but is seeing what's happening on the computer with their file. So even when we designed the standard operating procedures, we said to our colleagues in the field, you have to sit next to your client, the refugee, and they need to see in the screen what you're doing with their data. These are very important elements. So I'm not going to be long with you, but maybe when you are building automated decision-making systems for vulnerable populations, we invite you to think about these elements. We want you to stop, pause, and reflect about what you're doing. And this goes to my colleague's message also. There's no need to rush enough for you not to have a clear sight of what's happening. So stopping, pausing, and reflecting is important. Ask questions. When I was managing Zaatari refugee camp in Jordan for a couple of years, I had so many app developers who would come and say, I have this app, it's going to solve all your problems. You have diarrhea, it solves your problem. You have a shelter problem, it solves your problem. Without asking any question. They had never been in the camp. We had another, again, very enthusiastic person who came and brought 3D printing machines. And he said, I will print prosthetics for the disabled people in the camp. I said, did you talk to the Ministry of Health? Because the issue is not actually the lack of prosthetic limbs. The issue is actually how the protocol behind it. So ask questions and think about your assumptions and your own biases. So the more diverse your teams are, you decrease your bias. Praise the watchdogs. There are much written about the dangers and the pitfalls of the use of technology and AI. It's important that we listen to those people who are questioning us, because that will only make our systems more robust and more friendly to the most vulnerable. Don't think you know everything. Adapt as you go. If there's something that has been developed, probably, and in our line of work, in a fast-evolving context, you need to adapt as you go. And you should constantly revise the metrics of success, because saying we won today might not be enough, because the context we work in is very fast changing, and so it requires us to constantly revise our metrics of success. And I will leave you, because I think I went overboard. I get excited. These are the 7 ethical considerations that we thought of. I'll leave you with that. If you have any questions, we can talk later over cocktails. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. And I know that Jonnie had to run to catch a plane. So maybe the 4 of us could talk for the 2 remaining minutes about a very practical question which you all touched on, which is how to better connect with the actual domain experts on the ground, sector experts in camps or in climate change or in farming or education with technologists to provide AI solutions. I know you said, I'm sure everybody will give you their data, but yeah, so that would be great to hear your thoughts on that, and especially when the stakeholders are coming from different perspectives, if it's, yeah. So sometimes collaboration involves aligning incentives across different stakeholders, government, private sector, nonprofits, NGOs, UN agencies, et cetera. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Please.
I can go in 20 seconds.
Let's do it.
Having more people from each side attend conference and mixers, so that then you start the conversations that can follow up. In machine learning conferences, Jonnie and I started this AI for social good workshops, which are now in every major machine learning conference, where we make people come who are not machine learners. And rather than having nice white papers written by Amnesty to the World Economic Forum, which are very helpful, let's also get Amnesty come to, or UNHCR, come to NeurIPS or to ICML and talk about the problems, because people then, systems developer, will want to learn more and to try and solve by learning and through these contacts.
Yeah, so then they don't show up at the camp with a solution without knowing what's going on. Great. Any thoughts?
I argue that's not enough. And I do think that governments and development organizations need to think about whole new functions and investments. It's an often repeated phrase that we need more data scientists in government and development organizations, but I do think that doesn't suffice. You need a translator function. You need somebody who knows in and out climate change and knows enough to be the designer and the translator for the data scientists that hopefully work within your own four walls or that are sourced from the private sector. GovLab out of New York has a nice concept for data stewardship in private sector companies to only deal with data protocols given to governments or development organizations. And I do think we need to think of upskilling our workforce, domain experts on gender-based violence, on climate change, biodiversity, in data skills without having to be top-notch coders, but fulfilling that function that will require investments and new functions.
Well, I actually agree with everyone. So my answer is easier. I think we, as humanitarian organizations, we need to develop our own capacity to, I'm super lucky that I have 2 data scientists in my team. And I learn from them every day. But in the 10 operations I oversaw before, I didn't have a data scientist. So we need to improve in this sphere. The second element is more exchange. So I'm agnostic about the format of that. There's many ways of exchanging, but more exchange. But this leads me to my last point. That exchange needs to be based on the people we are paid to serve. Coming with a pre-designed product that is tested on in a very controlled environment with its complexities, and trying to fit the square in the bottle is a model that is, today there's a pattern there, and we need to shift that into the private sector, first of all, being interested to come to us in the field, in the deep field, understand the problems, understand the needs of the vulnerable populations, and then together we experiment towards solutions. But if you come to me with an already existing solution, and you're convinced and you're trying to sell me that product, that is a very difficult interaction to start with.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I hope this was a productive session for everyone. Thank you, participants.